The morning air hung cold and sharp over Gatlinburg, Tennessee, on October 14, 2019, when Park Ranger Tom Wayland noticed the abandoned Subaru Outback in the Cades Cove parking lot. The vehicle had been there for 3 days, according to his logs, its windows fogging up in the autumn chill. Inside, 2 camping permits lay on the dashboard, registered to David and Lauren Castellano from Asheville, North Carolina. Their planned return date had come and gone. David, 34, worked as a software engineer. Lauren, 32, taught middle school English. They'd been married for 6 years and were known among their friends as experienced hikers who took annual camping trips to the Smokies. This time, they'd planned a 4-day backcountry loop through some of the more remote sections of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a 522,000-acre wilderness straddling the Tennessee-North Carolina border. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more true mysteries like this, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with what happened next. When Ranger Wayland ran the plates and made contact with Lauren's sister, Emma, in Asheville, the concern in her voice was immediate. "Lauren always calls when they get back," Emma said, her words trembling. "Always. She knows I worry." By that evening, a search and rescue operation had been mobilized. 40 volunteers, including experienced trackers, search dogs, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging, began combing the trails the couple had indicated on their permit. The Castellanos had registered for the Anthony Creek Trail to Russell Field, then planned to continue toward Spence Field and loop back through the Boat Mountain Trail. It was a challenging route, roughly 30 miles through dense hardwood forests and high-elevation meadows. October weather in the Smokies could be unpredictable, with temperatures dropping into the 30s at night and fog rolling in thick enough to disorient even seasoned hikers. Search teams found their first campsite on day 2 of the operation. The tent was still standing at Russell Field, approximately 9 miles into their planned route. Inside, sleeping bags lay neatly rolled, cooking equipment was organized in stuff sacks, and both of their backpacks remained. Lauren's journal sat open to an entry dated October 11th, the second day of their trip. Her handwriting was cheerful, describing the fall colors and a family of deer they'd spotted near the trail. Nothing suggested distress. What puzzled investigators was that both cell phones were in the tent, along with their wallets, identification, and Lauren's prescription glasses, which her sister confirmed she couldn't see well without. Even more strange, their boots were lined up outside the tent entrance. David's watch was still attached to his pack's shoulder strap. "People don't just walk away from everything," said Detective Marcus Braxton of the Blount County Sheriff's Office, who'd been called in to assist. "Not their phones, not their identification, not even their shoes. Something made them leave that tent in a hurry, or something happened that prevented them from taking their belongings." The investigation expanded. Emma arrived in Gatlinburg within hours, staying at a roadside motel and spending her days at the search command post, a folding table set up in the Sugarlands Visitor Center parking lot. She brought photos of her sister and David, their wedding picture showing Lauren's bright smile and David's arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Emma distributed flyers throughout Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, and the surrounding communities, though the remote location of their last known campsite made a random encounter with another person unlikely. As days turned into a week, the search radius expanded to cover over 50 square miles. Helicopters with infrared cameras flew grid patterns over the dense canopy. Nothing. It was as if David and Lauren had simply evaporated into the mountain air. The temperatures had dropped below freezing several nights since their disappearance, and the reality that survival became less likely with each passing day weighed heavily on everyone involved. Emma couldn't reconcile what she knew about her sister with the evidence. Lauren was methodical, almost compulsively organized. She made lists for everything, planned meals days in advance, and never left home without telling someone exactly where she'd be. She's the person who texts you when she gets home safely, even if you didn't ask, Emma told Detective Braxton during one of their daily briefings. This doesn't make sense. The detective had worked missing persons cases in these mountains before. Every year people disappeared into the Smokies, some found within hours, others never seen again. The park's terrain was unforgiving, with steep ravines, hidden drop-offs, and weather that could shift from pleasant to dangerous in minutes. But something about this case felt different to him. The abandoned belongings, the seemingly voluntary departure from a secure campsite, the complete absence of any trace beyond that tent. On October 23rd, 9 days after the discovery of their vehicle, the search was officially scaled back to a recovery operation. The massive volunteer effort couldn't be sustained indefinitely, and the chances of finding David and Lauren alive had diminished to almost nothing. Emma refused to leave Gatlinburg. She stayed in that motel room, spending her days hiking the trails herself, calling her sister's name until her voice went hoarse. Detective Braxton couldn't let it go either. He'd spoken with David's parents in Pittsburgh, who described their son as cautious and analytical, not someone prone to risky decisions. David's father, Robert, had served in the army and taught his son wilderness survival skills. If something went wrong out there, David would know what to do, Robert insisted. He'd hunker down, find shelter, wait for help. He wouldn't panic. The detective began reviewing every detail again, interviewing park rangers about unusual activity in that area, checking weather patterns, and examining topographical maps. He learned that Anthony Creek Trail and the surrounding area had no significant drop-offs or water hazards where someone might fall. No bear attacks had been reported that season, no dangerous wildlife encounters. It was as if the couple had been plucked from their campsite by an invisible hand. Then, on November 4th, a hiker named Patricia Collins reported something odd to rangers. She'd been camping near Spence Field, about 3 miles from Russell Field, and mentioned seeing boot prints that seemed to circle repeatedly in a small area off the main trail, as if someone had been pacing or confused. Rangers investigated and found the prints, which appeared relatively fresh. They also found a granola bar wrapper, though it was impossible to determine if it belonged to the Castellanos. Detective Braxton hiked out to the location himself. The boot prints led approximately 200 yards off the marked trail into dense forest, where navigation would be difficult without a compass or GPS device. The prints seemed to wander, doubling back on themselves, creating a confused pattern that suggested disorientation. Then they simply stopped at the base of a large oak tree, as if the person had vanished into thin air. A forensic team was brought in to analyze the boot prints, comparing them to photographs of the hiking boots found at the Castellanos' tent. The tread patterns matched David's size 11 Merrill boots. This discovery shifted the investigation's focus. If David had walked this far from camp, why hadn't he taken his boots? And where was Lauren? Detective Braxton requested access to the couple's cell phone records and any digital footprint that might provide clues. Both phones had been recovered from the tent and were sent to a digital forensics lab in Knoxville. What they found complicated the mystery further. David's phone showed he'd been tracking their hike using a GPS application called All Trails, which logged their position every few minutes. The data showed the couple had arrived at Russell Field at 4:47 p.m. on October 11th and set up camp. But then something unusual appeared in the data. At 11:23 p.m. that same night, David's phone registered movement. The GPS coordinates showed the device traveling approximately half a mile northwest of the campsite into an area with no established trails. The movement continued sporadically until 2:14 a.m. on October 12th, when the phone's battery died. The final recorded location was deep in the forest, in the exact area where the confused boot prints had been found 3 weeks later. "This changes everything," Braxton told Emma when they met at a coffee shop in downtown Gatlinburg. Outside, November rain drummed against the windows, and tourists hurried past with umbrellas. David's phone moved during the night, which means either he took it with him or someone else did. But we found the phone in the tent, which means it had to have been brought back. Emma's face had grown gaunt from stress and sleepless nights. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Could someone have taken them? Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying we need to consider every possibility." Braxton pulled out a map and marked the locations. "If we assume David left the tent willingly with his phone but without his boots, walked to this location in the middle of the night, then somehow returned his phone to the tent, we have to ask why. What would make someone do that?" Emma stared at the map, her finger tracing the route. Lauren would have gone with him. She wouldn't let him go alone, especially at night. They did everything together. But Lauren's phone had never moved. According to the GPS data, it remained in the tent throughout the night. This discrepancy haunted Braxton. Two people, presumably together, but only one phone showing movement. Either they'd deliberately left one phone behind, or they'd been separated somehow. The detective expanded his investigation beyond the immediate search area. He contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, seeking input on cases involving couples who disappeared under similar circumstances. He also reached out to other law enforcement agencies in Tennessee and North Carolina to check for any unsolved crimes or suspicious activity in the region during that time period. What he discovered added another disturbing layer. In the past 5 years, 3 other hikers had gone missing in remote sections of the Smokies, all within a 20-mile radius of Russell Field. 2 were solo hikers whose remains were eventually found months later, attributed to falls and exposure. The third, a man named Gerald Brennan from Knoxville, had vanished in 2017 and never been found. His campsite had been discovered intact, much like the Castellanos, with his belongings undisturbed. Braxton drove to Knoxville to interview Brennan's widow, Dorothy, who still lived in the same house she'd shared with her husband. She was a small woman in her early 60s, her living room filled with photographs of better times. When Braxton explained the similarities between her husband's disappearance and the Castellanos case, Dorothy's composure cracked. "They told me Gerald got lost, that he wandered off and succumbed to the elements," she said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "But Gerald grew up in these mountains. He knew them better than anyone. He wouldn't just get lost." She retrieved a box from her closet, filled with papers and notes from her own investigation. "I hired a private investigator after the Park Service closed the case. He found something the officials missed. Inside the box was a photograph taken by another hiker 3 days before Gerald disappeared. The image showed a section of trail near Spence Field, and in the background, barely visible among the trees, was what appeared to be a small structure, possibly an old cabin or shed. "The Park Service said there are no structures in that area," Dorothy explained. "All the old homesteads were removed decades ago, but my investigator found property records showing a hunting cabin was built there in the 1940s by a local family. It was supposed to have been demolished in 1975 when the park expanded, but maybe it wasn't." Braxton photographed the documents and the picture. Back in his office, he cross-referenced the location shown in the photograph with the GPS coordinates from David's phone. They were close, perhaps within a quarter mile of each other. The possibility that an undocumented structure existed in that remote area provided the first potential lead that made sense. If David and Lauren had encountered someone living off-grid in the mountains, or stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen, it might explain their sudden disappearance. He assembled a small team, including 2 park rangers familiar with the area's history and a surveyor with ground-penetrating radar equipment. On November 18th, They hiked into the coordinates, fighting through thick rhododendron and mountain laurel that formed nearly impenetrable walls of vegetation. The temperature hovered in the low 40s, and a persistent mist made visibility poor. After 6 hours of searching, they found it. Partially collapsed and camouflaged by decades of vegetation growth, an old cabin stood in a small clearing. The structure's logs were rotting, the roof had caved in on one side, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. But someone had been there recently. A tarp stretched across the intact portion of the roof, creating a dry shelter. Inside, they found evidence of habitation: empty food cans, a sleeping bag, cigarette butts, and scattered clothing. More disturbing were the personal items. A woman's fleece jacket, navy blue with a small embroidered name on the chest, Lauren. A man's headlamp, the brand matching the equipment list David had submitted with their camping permit. And most chilling, a Polaroid photograph pinned to the wall showing David and Lauren, sitting against the cabin's interior wall, their eyes wide with fear. Braxton immediately called for additional support. Within 2 hours, the area was swarmed with investigators, forensic technicians, and search dogs. The evidence was carefully documented and collected. The sleeping bag was sent for DNA analysis. The cigarette butts would provide DNA samples of whoever had been living in the cabin. The photograph was examined for any clues about when it was taken and what might have happened next. Emma was notified about the discovery but not given details yet. Braxton couldn't tell her about the photograph, couldn't describe the terror he'd seen in her sister's eyes, not until they knew more, not until they found answers. The DNA analysis from the cigarette butts came back within a week, matched against state and federal databases. They belonged to a man named Vernon Pike, age 57, who had an extensive criminal record including assault, kidnapping and weapons charges. Pike had been released from Tennessee State Prison in 2016 after serving 18 years. His last known address was in Saviorville, but he'd violated parole 6 months after release and had been missing since. A manhunt for Vernon Pike began immediately. His photograph was distributed to every law enforcement agency in Tennessee, North Carolina, and surrounding states. The media picked up the story, and suddenly the disappearance of David and Lauren Castellano was national news. Emma did interview after interview, her voice steady despite the pain, pleading for information about her sister and brother-in-law. Detective Braxton studied Pike's criminal history obsessively. The man had a pattern. In 1998, he'd kidnapped a young couple hiking near Cherokee National Forest, holding them captive for 3 days before they managed to escape. He'd been arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years, reduced for good behavior. The similarities to the Castellanos' case were impossible to ignore. Park rangers intensified their search, now looking specifically for Pike or any signs of recent human activity in the remote sections of the Smokies. They checked abandoned structures, caves, and off-trail areas. Thermal imaging flights increased, but Pike, if he was still in the park, knew how to stay hidden. He'd grown up in these mountains, according to his records, the son of a bootlegger who'd operated an illegal still in the backwoods during the 1970s. On December 2nd, nearly 2 months after the Castellanos had vanished, a deer hunter named Frank Robbins was tracking a wounded buck through dense forest about 8 miles from the cabin when he found something that made him immediately call 911. Partially concealed beneath fallen leaves and branches was a shallow grave. Inside were human remains. The Blount County coroner was called to the scene, along with forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee's Body Farm, a research facility that specialized in decomposition studies. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to Knoxville for analysis. Within 48 hours, dental records confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to David Castellano. Emma collapsed when Braxton delivered the news. She'd been staying with a local family in Gatlinburg, people who'd taken her in when her motel money ran out, and they held her as she sobbed. The detective waited, giving her time, before gently explaining that they were still searching for Lauren. David's death had been caused by blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a rock or heavy object. The violence of it made Braxton's jaw clench with anger. But there was something else, something that gave him a sliver of hope regarding Lauren. David's body showed defensive wounds, evidence that he'd fought back, and scattered near the grave, investigators found a torn piece of fabric that matched the fleece jacket they discovered in the cabin. It suggested a struggle, movement, possibly an escape attempt. If Lauren got away, where would she go? Braxton asked Emma during one of their meetings. They sat in his office at the sheriff's station, a map of the Great Smoky Mountains spread across his desk. Think like your sister. She's terrified, possibly injured, alone in the wilderness. Where does she run? Emma studied the map through red-rimmed eyes. Her finger hovered over the terrain, tracing waterways and trails. Lauren always said if you're lost, follow water downstream. It leads to civilization eventually, and she'd want to get as far from that cabin as possible. Her finger moved southeast, following a creek that eventually joined the little river, which ran parallel to a road leading out of the park. Search teams mobilized along that corridor, checking the creek banks, scanning for any signs of passage. Days passed with no discoveries. Then, on December 8th, a call came into the tip line that had been established for the case. A woman named Diane Patterson, who ran a small bed and breakfast in Townsend, a tiny community on the park's border, said a young woman matching Lauren's description had appeared at her door in the middle of the night on October 13th, over a month earlier. Braxton drove to Townsend immediately, his heart pounding. Diane Patterson was waiting on her porch, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "I've been following the news," she said as Braxton climbed her front steps. "When I saw that photograph of the missing couple, I knew it was her, but I didn't understand until now why she ran." According to Diane, the woman had arrived around 2 in the morning, barefoot, and wearing only a t-shirt and hiking pants, covered in scratches and mud. She was shaking violently, whether from cold or fear, Diane couldn't tell. She kept saying, "He's coming, he's going to find me," over and over, Diane explained. "I brought her inside, gave her blankets, made her tea, but she wouldn't calm down. She wouldn't give me her name or let me call anyone." Diane had a daughter about the same age who'd struggled with mental health issues, and she recognized trauma when she saw it. She didn't push, she simply provided safety and warmth. The woman had stayed for about 2 hours, accepting food and dry clothes. She'd asked to use the phone, but then seemed unable to remember any numbers. "She was in shock," Diane said. "I've seen it before. Her mind just couldn't function properly." When Diane had stepped into the kitchen to make more tea, the woman disappeared. Diane found her front door open, the borrowed clothes folded neatly on a chair, and the woman gone into the night. She'd searched the property and the road, but found nothing. "I thought maybe she was running from an abusive partner or something," Diane said, her voice heavy with regret. "I should have called the police right then, but she seemed so scared of everything. I thought I was respecting her wishes." Braxton felt a surge of hope mixed with frustration. Lauren had made it out of the park alive. She'd escaped Pike. But where had she gone after leaving Diane's bed and breakfast? He checked hospitals, homeless shelters, and women's crisis centers throughout East Tennessee. Nothing, no Jane Does matching her description, had been admitted anywhere. The investigation took on new urgency. If Lauren was alive but wandering in a traumatized state, unable to identify herself, she could be anywhere. Braxton coordinated with police departments across the region, sharing Lauren's photograph and description. Emma recorded a video message that was shared widely on social media, speaking directly to her sister, telling her it was safe to come home. On December 15th, a social worker named Grace Martinez at a women's shelter in Knoxville contacted the tip line. A woman who'd been staying there for 3 weeks, calling herself Jane, matched Lauren's description. She'd been brought in by a bus driver who'd found her wandering near the Greyhound station, confused and unable to say where she was going. The shelter had provided her with food, clothing, and a bed, but the woman remained largely non-verbal, responding to questions with nods or shakes of her head. Braxton and Emma drove to Knoxville together, neither speaking during the 40-minute drive, both afraid to hope. The shelter was a converted house in an older neighborhood, its rooms filled with women seeking refuge from various circumstances. Grace Martinez met them at the door, her expression cautious but warm. "She's in the common room," Grace said. "I showed her the photograph from the news. She started crying but wouldn't confirm or deny it was her." Emma entered the room first. A woman sat in a corner chair, wearing donated sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her brown hair cut short, in a style that didn't match the photographs Emma carried. She was thinner than Lauren, her face gaunt and marked with fading bruises. But when she looked up and saw Emma, her eyes, those unmistakable green eyes, filled with tears. "Lauren," Emma whispered, crossing the room. Her sister stood on shaky legs, and then they were holding each other, both sobbing, words tumbling out incoherently. Braxton stood back, his own eyes stinging. Grace Martinez smiled, wiping at her cheeks. The reunion was bittersweet. Lauren was alive, but she was profoundly traumatized. She was transported to University of Tennessee Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. Doctors diagnosed her with severe PTSD, acute stress disorder, and dissociative amnesia related to her ordeal. She remembered fragments, pieces of what had happened, but much remained locked behind walls her mind had constructed for protection.